Hello everyone, this is the International Master Sav Givon here. Today we're going to discuss one of the most beautiful chess games ever played, a game which was played in the year 1999 by two players that I hope do not need any big introduction. With the white pieces we have the reigning world champion at the time, Garry Kasparov. With the black pieces we have Vasil and Topalov, also extremely strong chess player back in the day, but which is also active these days. So what is unique about this game, to me at least, is the fact that a lot of this game really saw a lot of unique and extremely beautiful sacrifices and a very beautiful attack that Kasparov managed to execute in this game. But for many people who watch this game, they might assume that Kasparov just calculated, everything to the end and just realized that he's going to checkmate. But this is not true. I think at least not necessarily. I think that this game, and you will see a couple of specific moments in this game that might also indicate that, shows that great players, and I think especially a player like Kasparov, a very aggressive and dynamic player, many times we will see them playing moves out of pure intuition and feeling, and which based on their experience and knowledge. And what is beautiful that in many moments in this game, Kasparov made such strong moves that even for today's chess engines, which are considerably stronger than any human chess players, even for these engines, some of the moves that Kasparov made in this game are not obvious, and it even takes for the engine sometimes to realize that these moves were maybe the strongest. And it takes, even in some moments, if you look through this game through an engine, it's actually a very fun experience, because you might encounter positions where the engines might say just a big advantage to black, but after a couple of seconds or minutes, suddenly it completely changes his mind and say that white is completely winning. So a really fun experience. So also a little bit of background. This is the year 1999. Topalov playing the black pieces, and according to my research, in the year 1998, Kasparov and Topalov played eight times in tournament games in different time controls, but the score between them was something like 4 wins for Kasparov, 1 win for Topalov, and the rest were draws. And going through these games, I've noticed that many games Kasparov won because of very good preparation in the opening. So in this game, I think already in the first move, after e4, Topalov decided to slightly surprise his very well prepared opponent. I think at these days, Kasparov really had a reputation of a crazy good opening preparation. Many people were pretty much intimidated by this. So instead of being kind of faithful to his normal Sicilian defense that he usually implements, Topalov played this move d6, which is kind of an invitation to go into a Pyrrhic defense, much less popular opening, especially in the top level. But I think this was perhaps an interesting choice, just to get Kasparov out of his preparation and perhaps playing a slightly more original game where both players had to think on their own. And this actually was also very good for the viewers, because we are about to encounter such a great game. So Kasparov played d4, seizing the center, knight f6, knight c3. We have pretty standard stuff here. Black is now playing the characteristic move for this opening g6. So his intentions is to fianchetto the bishop on g7. I think this opening was also fairly comfortable for Topalov to play because he is also a King's Indian player, and so in the Perk defense and in the King's Indian, the pawn structure looks pretty much the same, with black putting a pawn on d6 and striving to fianchetto his bishop on g7. So it definitely felt home here, even though it is not exactly his opening. And Kasparov chooses here one of the most aggressive setups that the white players can choose here, which is to play the move bishop e3 with the intention of playing queen d2 and long castle and playing a position of opposite side castlings. Very, very understandable choice of Kasparov. Very aggressive player. He wants to go for a sharp game. Topalov now plays the move bishop g7. I will not deal too much with opening subtleties here. For example, some opening experts in the Perk defense suggest that it's wiser to start with the move c6 with some subtle points about white wanting at some point to play the move queen d2 and bishop h6. So black might want to actually capture the bishop on h6 in one tempo, in comparison, for example, the game position where he had to do this in two tempos because the bishop has already gone to g7. This, I think at this stage though, the players are not really perhaps paying too much attention to such subtle details. So bishop g7 was played, queen to d2, c6. In these variations, black is not really in any hurry to castle, because if it does castle, it kind of gives white a very kind of obvious target to attack. The king on the king side, he would start perhaps pushing his pawns forward on the king side, and he maybe prefers to be slightly more flexible. So white plays the move f3, preparing for some future attacks on the king side with g4 and h4. And black plays b5. He already thinks about his own counterplay on the queen side, which is a very understandable move. And now in this and in the next couple of moves, both players are trying to be kind of clever about their castling. Nobody is really revealing on which side they want to castle. If you want to gain some more knowledge about how to choose the right side to castle in a chess game, you can watch the video I did about this topic on this channel. So Kasparov chooses to play this kind of flexible move knight to e2 because he thinks that if he castles long immediately, once again it gives black this kind of slightly easier times to create his own counterplay on the queen side. For example, black can play a move like queen a5, threatening to go b4, dislodging the knight from c3, following by capturing on a2. So he tries to be just flexible and develop his pieces. Black is doing exactly the same thing. He is not committing his king to short castling, but rather waits for a couple of moves to see exactly what white is doing. He plays the move knight to d7, perhaps preparing some maneuvers towards the queen side of the board, where black's counterplay should come from. And white plays this move bishop h6, very a natural exchange. The bishop on g7 of black's is a very active bishop. Exchanging it serves white intentions pretty well. Black now takes on h6, queen takes h6. At this point, it was pretty obvious that black is not going to castle short in this game, and his intentions are to castle on the other side. So he plays the natural move bishop to b7, developing a piece. Now white plays this kind of clever move pawn to a3. This is a small preparation for the move short castles, as if white plays this move immediately. Once again, this move queen a5 comes with the very unpleasant threat of b4, and there are actually serious problems to protect the pawn on a2 for white. So a little prophylactic move there from Kasparov. So now black is once again making a very natural move, striking in the center of the board. You might notice that at this point white is controlling the center pretty much. The white center is pretty much uncontested, so black tries to place his own pawn in the center, fighting basically for his ground. And basically now white is ready to castle. He does so, also kind of eyeballing black's queen along the d file. So Topalov really hurries to let his queen bring his queen out of this file. So queen e7 was played, also preparing long castles. Now white plays this, once again, prophylactic move. You might notice that this position is quite static. Nothing really very dramatic is going on the board. Both players are kind of allowing themselves to play slightly slow moves, which slightly improve their position. So for example, here Kasparov plays this move king b1. This is a universally useful move for white, getting the king out of any potential checks along this file, or this diagonal, or this file that might get opened up in the future. This is a kind of a move that sometimes players play even automatically in some Sicilian variations, just to get the king safe. Once again, Topalov playing a move, once again also in a similar fashion, a6, just slightly defending his pawn on b5, which is a little bit weak, perhaps thinking in the future about pushing his pawn to c5 and releasing that basically caged bishop on b7, which is at the moment pretty much passive. Now white to move, and I want to ask the viewers, so you're about to reach the middle game, still not all of your pieces are developed. How would you increase white's pressure over black's position? And also along the way we also need to think about development. So which plan white chose in this position? You can stop the video and think about it a little bit. So Kasparov chose a very nice plan. He just intuitively felt that black's queen side is slightly exposed, so he chose to play this very nice move knight to c1, with the idea to maneuver the knight all the way to this weakened square on a5, which could be a very nice anchor square for this knight. But also this move perhaps helping this bishop to get into the game later on. So a multi-purpose move there from Kasparov, very good. Black castles long, he doesn't really have all that much options. White now played knight to b3, continuing his plan. At this point in the game, I think Topalov just realized that if he's going to just sit and do nothing, Kasparov will inevitably develop his attack to be very strong. So he decides actually to create some complications and open up the center very aggressively. He now takes on d4, and after rook takes d4 is going for c5. This is a kind of a double-edged strategy, because on one side black is activating his bishop and also slightly improving his structure on the queen side of his pawns, but at the same time you see that with each pawn moving in front of his king, he slightly weakens his king position. And this is, in a chess game, something that many times a decision that the chess player many times needs to choose is he needs to evaluate what is more important in the position, the activity of his pieces or the safety of his king. In this game, Topalov chooses the activity, which is a very understandable decision. And after rook d1, black plays knight to b6. Once again, a very understandable move, getting the knight into slightly more active square, and even thinking about counterplay with the move pawn to d5. Now it is one more important moment in this game. It is white to move, and I once again want to ask the viewers to find a way to improve white's position. So the knight on b3 is already kind of well placed, ready to jump to g5. think about which pieces of white are still not developed into the game, and let's find good squares for them. So Kasparov plays Kasparov played a very nice move, pawn to g3, because he realizes bishop doesn't have a lot of future on this diagonal, because these two pawns really block the vision for him. So he decides to maneuver his bishop to this diagonal, which is actually will have much more purpose there. And after the move king to b8, the bishop is now ready to go to h3, but Kasparov played this kind of intermediate move here. He played knight a5 first. Some critics claimed after the game that this move was perhaps slightly inaccurate, but once again, I'm not going to be dealing with the very subtle differences between all of white's moves here, just to make this video on a kind of not make it too long. Basically, this move is very natural. Black now plays bishop to a8 to safeguard his bishop. White continues his plan with bishop h3, and I want you to remember this bishop on h3. He's actually going to play a very important role in white's eventual attack. For the moment, he's covering a lot of important squares in the black's camp. For example, he is not allowing the black king to escape to c8 if he ever gets under attack. He is not allowing the square on d7 too easily for the black pieces. He is contributing quite a lot to white's attack. Black now, once again, understood that he cannot just sit and wait for white to execute his plans. He played the move d5, counter-attacking in the center. Kasparov checked on f4, bringing his queen closer to the attack, because until that point the queen had already no purpose on h6, since the black king castled on the other side. And after king to a7, Kasparov brings his last pieces into the game, rook h to e1, fully centralizing white rooks. Now black plays the move pawn to d4, hitting the knight on c3. So where do you think the knight should retreat to? And remember that this position, there is a very big fight on the board for the initiative. Nobody really wants to lose any ground and to move his pieces into passive positions. So for example, moves like knight e2 or knight a2 do not really inspire us as very active. So Kasparov basically played the only move which makes sense in this position in terms of developing his attack, which is knight to d5, going only to the center of the board, opening up lines for his pieces, and now the rook on e1 starts to be active. Black took this knight on d5. He cannot really stand the activity of this knight. Knight takes d5, pawn takes d5, and queen d6 the only move, because the queen still has to protect this knight on f6. And starting from this point, we are about to kind of go very we are about to go into the very sharp complications that arise, that happen in the game. I want to mention that if Kasparov would not play the move that he actually played in the game and just go for an endgame, for example, like an obvious move like queen takes d6, if anything in this position black is probably doing better, because without the queens now the black king is completely safe, and actually the pawn on d5 is very likely to fall either now or in the next couple of moves. So this was definitely not Kasparov's intention to go for the endgame. He understood that he must keep his initiative alive, and he sat here for a very long time calculating a lot of variations. Once again, in my opinion, he did not realize at this point exactly what is going on. But he felt that he must have a strong attack here, because all of his pieces are well placed. The knight on a5 is well placed for the attack. Both of his rooks are centralized, and also this bishop as we mentioned, is doing quite an important job of controlling important squares along this diagonal, and he decided to go what I consider to be an intuitive sacrifice. Rook takes d4. Pretty much a beautiful move in itself, but this move is only being justified by the next move. Now, in the actual game, Topalov just accepted the sacrifice, probably just kind of not believing that Kasparov can sacrifice so much material without having a very forced way to checkmate, and he probably believed that he might be able to hold because he will have a lot of material at his disposal. Once again, after the game, a lot of analyses have been made, a lot of ways for Black to fight back in this position have been found. I will mention a few. Some very cold-blooded moves. For example, one move that almost no source have been recommending, and I don't think also many players would be able to find, including myself, is a very cold-blooded move, g5, with a very subtle point that if white, for example, just takes this pawn, now black can take the rook on d4 without the queen ever being able to take on d4. This is just one option that might give black some hope. Another option that some sources have recommended is the move king to b6, which is perhaps even a more cold-blooded move, just attacking the white knight on a5, keeping all of the tension in the position. I believe this is an extremely difficult move to make in a practical game. So let's just go with the game moves, because this is eventually what we want to see, the beauty of white's attack. Pawn takes d4. And now, maybe for a lot of people, it would be, they might assume that after this move, it is pretty much automatic just to take on d4. But now actually black can block with his queen on b6, and it will be much more difficult for white to continue his attack, and perhaps black is just winning because the moment white is running out of fuel in his attack, he will be just left with too much material down. So the really beautiful point about white's sacrifice is this extremely subtle move, rook to e7 check. Basically a double rook sacrifice. Now the second rook already cannot be accepted because after queen takes e7, queen takes d4. The difference is that now black does not have this move queen to b6, which means that the only legal move is king to b8. And now after queen b6 check, black is just losing on the spot. By the way, notice how important is this bishop on a3, as I mentioned earlier. For example, bishop to b7, knight c6 check, and black is getting checkmated on the next move. So black now played his only move, king to b6, and he's about to go for a very long walk with his king. Queen takes d4 check, king takes a5, this is a forcing move. So at the moment, black is a rook and a piece up, but his king is reaching all the way to a4, an extremely uncommon square for a king to be on. So I think that in his head, Kasparov kind of calculated all the way to this position when he initially sacrificed his first rook, and I think he didn't really see a way to checkmate black by forcing means, but he just felt that something must be found here. So in this position, Kasparov played the move which I believe is extremely natural. He played the move queen to c3, just threatening checkmate on b3. After the game, after a lot of analysis, once again we are talking about times where people did not have yet such strong engines as we had today. They had to figure everything themselves. They came to realize that the move rook to a7 was stronger. Once again, an extremely subtle move. The idea is that now white is not only does not only want to checkmate on this angle, he is also creating ideas to checkmate from this angle, because this king on a4 is extremely problematically placed and can be very easily checkmated. In theory, white just need to have basically the right resources for this. I won't go very deep into this one because later on I will show, if I will just show every possible variation that might appear in this game, this video will be basically endless. I will just try to focus on the most important variations in this game. So queen c3, threatening to checkmate black on b3. Basically, at this point, I think that Topalov realized that he's in a big danger, but at this point there is no way back probably. So he took the pawn on d5 with his queen, just to illustrate one very beautiful checkmate that might appear. If black would take on d5 with his bishop, white could checkmate here with an extremely beautiful move, just king b2. And the threat is just to go queen to b3 check. So I will just make a random move just for us to see such a unique checkmate on the board. And how often do you see such a checkmate? Probably practically almost never. And we will see actually this motif also perhaps in some future variations. So white's attack, as I've mentioned, is basically based on two motifs: the checkmating ideas on a6, or the checkmating ideas on b3. So basically what white is going to do on his next move is to combine both of these ideas to eventually checkmate black. So queen takes d5, rook a7, threatening checkmate on a6. The only way for black to defend is bishop to b7. And now white uses the fact that the black queen must constantly guard this square on b3 in order to take this bishop on b7. I will just quickly mention that if white is just playing king b2 like we have seen previously, threatening the same checkmate, now it's not working because black can just exchange queens with queen d4. This would not work. So white is taking on b7, restoring some material. So now black is kind of only having a rook up, but white is still having an extremely strong attack at his disposal. So at this point, black played the move queen to c4. Very natural move, trying to exchange queens, and basically with the exchange of queens, black is hoping for white's attack to disappear. I want to show you one extremely beautiful additional variation. Some later sources claim that the move rook h to e8 was a better defensive strategy, just to bring just more peace into the defense. Now white must play the move rook to b6. White must constantly create threats of checkmate, obviously, because otherwise he would be just left with no material. So this is the threat. Black at this point is forced to play rook to a8 to defend the pawn on a6. And now look at this beautiful move, bishop to f1, which is only being found after the game. This is maybe one of the most subtle moves throughout the variations I've encountered in this game. In order to understand the point of this move, let us see what happens if white tries to play the move rook to d6. So the point is that black cannot take the rook because of the checkmate on b3. But unfortunately for white, black can just play queen to c4 and keep the long diagonal and still guards the square on b3. This is why the move bishop f1 is coming, with the sole purpose of protecting the square on c4 in preparation of the move rook to d6. And actually black is completely helpless here. White is just threatening rook d6, winning. Extremely beautiful. Black is full rook up and it's his move and he cannot do anything. He played the queen c4, very understandable move. Now white grabbed the knight on f6. So keeping the queens on the board, restoring some material, and also, very importantly, threatening queen takes a6 checkmate. Once again, as we mentioned, it is extremely important for white to constantly create threats and not to allow white any time, not to allow black any time to consolidate himself. At this point, black had a chance to exchange queens. Many people ask themselves after the game why Topalov at this point did not just play rook d1 check, king to b2, and now queen d4 check, forcing the exchange of queens. And after queen takes d4, rook takes d4. This position might not seem so bad for black because he's having still some material advantage. But very soon we realize that after the move rook takes f7, not only that white has 2 pawns and a bishop for a rook, which means that black does not really have any material advantage, white is now threatening to play bishop e6 and bishop e3 checkmate. So even without the queens on the board, black's troubles with his king still continue. White is winning in this position. So black tried his best with king takes a3, queen takes a6 check, and king takes b4. We see that black actually also have his own attack. If white loses even a single move, he will be checkmated himself. So this move, that with every move, white must carry a very big threat and must do everything extremely forcefully. So this is white's move in this position. What would you play as white? And keep in mind that you have to do everything, if possible, with the gain of checks. White doesn't actually have a whole lot of checks in this position. So basically he must play c3 check, keeping the same logic of forcing moves. Black cannot take with the queen because then after queen takes b5 he will be checkmated extremely quickly. He was forced to play king takes c3. Now, thanks to this little sacrifice of the pawn, white is now granted one more check on a1. We see that the black king is going for a very long walk. He is still having the material advantage, but white is constantly creating threats and checks, so he cannot really arrange any proper defense. Black played king to d2. If he chooses to go back on b4, then he will be just chased by the white queen into a5, after which queen a3 check, queen a4 is forced, and rook a7. The game would not end in a checkmate, but white will win the black queen, which is good enough for him to claim the victory. So black played king to d2, queen b2 check, and king d1. So you can see that the black king basically went all the way from e8 to d1 in this game. Quite a remarkable achievement for white. But it's still not obvious how exactly to win as white, because there are no kind of very good ways to check here the black king. And now Kasparov, being a great chess player, uses all of his resources, realizes that the only piece that still did not contribute too much to white's attack is this bishop on h3. The original purpose of this bishop was to guard some key squares on this diagonal, but since the king is long gone from these squares, he now finds an extremely beautiful move, bishop to f1. Not only attacking the black queen, but also disturbing the queen from creating any counter checks against the white king, with the tactical idea that if this bishop is being captured, then we have queen c2 check, king e1 and rook e7, with checkmate to follow on the next move. And this was pretty much the move which sealed the fate of the black king in this game. Topalov tried his best chance to go rook d2, trying to exchange the queens, but Kasparov had no such intentions. He now played basically the last precise move of this game, which was rook to d7, basically deflecting the black rook from attacking the white queen. Black was forced to take this rook, and now white can safely capture the black queen. And luckily for white, after b takes c4, at this point white only have a queen for 2 rooks and a pawn, but very conveniently for him, also the black rook on h8 was hanging, so he just grabbed it and went on to win in a couple of moves thanks to his huge material advantage. So I really hope you enjoyed this game, one of the the holy grails of Kasparov and his chess imagination. Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts on the game or any more variations you wanted to check. And yeah, don't forget to follow the blog, which is that will be created specifically for this game, and you can follow it there on the link below. So thank you all guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos. See you guys, bye bye.